cognitive aspects of counting.
Thanks a lot. So first of all, I should thank Marcin who invited me here, and I guess other things to think about. So Marcin told me that the talk shouldn't be. So what I do is linguistics, formal linguistics. Marcin told me that what I should do here shouldn't be too technical. So I try to tell this story without any of the linguistic technology whatsoever. But if you are interested in the formal and informal stuff, please ask me. We can talk about it. Okay? So I try to focus on the conceptual distinctions more than on the typical linguistic methodology, but we will see some intersections. Okay, so before we begin, I was told that apparently there are many people here with different backgrounds, so this is sort of always a little bit hard to give a talk in such an environment, but it is exciting. Okay, so we will start with something very, very general. So I will read this short passage from Chomsky, which tries to capture what the purpose of science is. And he would say something like that. The whole goal of science is to replace complex visibles by simple invisibles. That is science. If you are doing that, then it is something. If you are not doing that, then it is something else. It is data organization, flower collection. Sometimes the latter is useful, but it should not be confused with science. If it is science, says Galileo, it is an effort to satisfy Galileo's maxim. Nature is simple. If we have not figured it out, it is our problem. So this is something that, so I treat it to be a general scientific motto. And this is more or less like to start off, maybe to give an example. So what a scientist and a linguist is also a scientist, what the scientist tries to do is try to look at nature, which is a lot of math, a lot of complicated things, a lot of data. It doesn't make any sense, okay? And then you try to find certain hidden principles, certain invisibles, which the assumption is are simple. And those simple hidden principles, those underlying mechanisms of nature, if you wish, somehow give rise to those complex visibles, to the complex visible world. Okay? And if you are interested in snowflakes, okay, there's a lot of, it's like you can find many types of snowflakes. This is very complicated if you want to it's like only by looking at what nature gives us, if you want to make any sense out of it, this is very hard, right? But if you try, and if you can figure out, then it turns out that you can actually derive all those types, all those shapes from certain laws of nature, and you can model that then by using some kind of fractal models or whatever. But so the general idea is you look at things that are complicated, that are messy, and you try to reduce that complexity to something underlying which is simple. Okay? Okay. So how does it relate to linguistics? So in linguistics, what people like me, what we do, we work with something that is called linguistic intuition. So very often, I do that a lot, many people do that a lot. You do something like armchair linguistics, you can of course do armchair philosophy as well. So you try to introspect and see what your intuitions about certain types of constructions, certain types of sentences are. Of course, you don't need to do armchair linguistics, and you don't need to do armchair philosophy. You can go experimental, and you can use all those very nice methods that psychology has developed. Of course, we can do that. We're not going to talk about that today. I will just give you a hint about an ongoing project about that. But that's basically what you do. You're interested in two types of intuitions. Intuitions concerning grammaticality or ungrammaticality. Okay? Don't think about it as some prescriptive notion. This is something This is something that has to do with your knowledge. If you are a user, a native user of a language, you have this implicit knowledge, and the assumption is that your intuitions about a certain sentence being well formed, something good, something okay, is due to that implicit knowledge. The second type of intuitions concern felicity or infelicity. Okay, so the grammaticality judgments are about well-formedness. Felicity judgments are about meaning. Okay, a certain sentence can have a certain meaning, or it cannot have a certain meaning. It can be ambiguous. It doesn't have to be ambiguous. So those are a little bit different types of intuitions. And one interesting thing when you think about linguistics is that you immediately recognize that there's a lot of constraints, okay, on what's possible. So if you look at one, so we have English sentences, Katie loves herself. This is just a normal English sentence, but Katie loves himself. This is weird. We mark this weirdness by the star here, so this is awkward. Katie thinks that Anne loves herself is also weird on one reading. So this is a normal sentence. If you take Anne and herself to be coreferential, so Katie thinks that Anne loves Anne, okay? This is the meaning you have. But you could think of another meaning, okay? A meaning where this guy here corresponds to Katie. So that would be Katie thinks that Anne loves Katie. But this is not what the sentence means. You cannot interpret it this way. Okay? So this is this kind of intuition that you want to explain. Why the hell is that? Okay, how come? Okay? And if you think about 1D, Katie's father loves himself. Okay? This is okay because himself corresponds to father. Okay? They are coreferential. But you cannot say Katie's father loves herself, meaning that he loves Katie. Okay? Everyone, it's like if you translate it to your native language, this should be okay. So only a subset of constructions are possible. Okay? So you could logically you can imagine a lot of things. Okay? But in natural language you find only a subset of what's possible. And of constructions means and so on. So the purpose of linguistics is to explain how can you account for the fact that certain things are possible and certain things are impossible? That certain things are there, that there are certain types of snowflakes you find, and there are certain types of snowflakes you don't find. Okay? And the idea is that you try to reduce it to certain simple, invisibles, hidden engines behind the language that will generate that will give you that. Okay? So the framework I work I work within the framework of generative linguistics. So, it's like, does everyone know both of those guys? Yes? Okay, so no need to. So basically, there are two aspects. Syntax explains you how you create structure, how you put things together, what kind of rules are possible, and semantics tells you how you interpret that structure. Okay, so in linguistics you find a lot of messy data. Okay, so this is something very well studied. This is it's like something that people understand very well. Everywhere you look at, it's like you find like things like total mysteries. Why this is possible? Why this is not possible, and so on. Right. So the idea you look for underlying structures and rules, and structure is interested in terms of hierarchy. Okay? So in linguistics, in generative linguistics, what you do, you try to interpret things as being dependent on each other in some way, a certain element category being more important, dominating other categories. So you form some sort of hierarchical order, and those rules corresponding to what structures are possible. Remember, those are constraints. Okay? But those constraints at the same time are source of great creativity. Right? So we need to capture two things at the same time. One thing, that you constrain what's possible, but at the same time you constrain it in such a way that you can make a beautiful creative use of the kind kind of means you have. Okay, and this so it's like this is an old enterprise. So the assumption is, or maybe the lesson is that the linguistic system, the language faculty, is based on something that looks like a computational system. Okay, a system that okay, if you have the formula 2, okay, so there are certain rules of arithmetic that you first compute this, and then the output is here, and then you add this, and there is a certain hierarchy of operations. Okay, right? So this is something concerning computation, and the idea is that something like that, not this, but something like that is the underlying, the hidden principle of language, right? So one example of that would be if we go back to a sentence. Oh, what is that? This is because. Can we do something about it, or is it? But can we live with it?
That I think is fixed. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. So generally, so those guys are called anaphors. So something like Katie Mother loves herself. So a hierarchical structure, a very simplified one analysis you can have, a very simplified one is like this is not the point to so to give you an intro to formal syntax, but the idea is that you have sort of this says Katie's mother loves herself, right? So the idea is that there are certain abstract categories, they form some kind of structure, you have some kind of hierarchy, and the explanation why this is possible is given by a very simple rule, which is not simple if you haven't done linguistics before, but this is much simpler than, say, listing all possible grammatical or grammatical meanings, so doing a catalog of possibilities. And it says that basically this is possible because herself corresponds to Katie, to mother, to Katie's mother, which is the antecedent of the. Oh, sorry, this is bad. So this should be antecedent with a antecedent. So what you need is that this guy here needs to, what would you say, command this guy here, right? Which means that it needs to be in such a position, right, that it is, say, let's call it left to the whole node, whole chunk of structure on the right side, and this guy herself needs to be somewhere there. It couldn't correspond to Katie. Why? Because what's to the right side of Kate is mother, and here you don't have herself. Okay? So in a very informal way, that's an example of a hidden principle we're after. Okay? Right. So now going to the talk proper. So I will talk about counting. This is very common. So we have we do this all the time in our everyday life experience. I will talk about two aspects, cognitive and linguistic aspects, and I will try to show you how they relate to each other. Sometimes there's neat correspondence, sometimes it's not that easy to make any sense out of it. And before we start, there are three different related concepts of counting, right? So the first concept is something like in 6a, when you have a count list, right? You have a recitation list, there's like order of symbols, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, this is what sometimes people mean when they say counting. Another meaning is an arithmetic meaning, right? When you have certain abstract operation, you say something like 4 plus 3 times 2 equals 10. Okay, so you do not provide a count list. You operate on symbols in such a way, but this is some kind of abstract number. And the third thing is something like quantification in natural language, when you say 3 cats, when you give a cardinality of a set of cats, or pluralities of cats. Okay? Those are three different aspects, but they are sort of related. Right. We've already talked about that, so we'll talk about cognitive aspects of counting and linguistic aspects of counting. Then I will sketch a very informal proposal. We can talk, if you're interested in informal details, we can talk about it. I forgot to say. So if you have any questions, okay, any question whatsoever, it's like just interrupt me at any point. Okay, just ask them. Right? I assume that some of those things might be you might be very familiar with. Some of those things might be very totally new for you. So it's like just interrupt. Okay, and we will conclude with just an observation. Right. Okay. So it is very well known that something that is called number sense is a property of the biological world. Okay, so not only humans, not only human animals, but also non-human animals have some cognitive system to deal with numerosity. Okay, and there are well-known two evolutionary old cognitive systems: the ODS system, object tracking system, and ANS, the approximate number system. Okay, so look at those pictures. We've got mamaducks here, and we've got ducklings. So you have, and we will see which mamaduck will be in greater trouble when she loses one of her duckling in a second. So we'll go back to the slide in a moment. But first, let's try to explain what those systems are about. Okay, object tracking. So who can tell immediately how many marks, how many strokes are there without counting? Without counting? Impossible. No? Easy, right? Okay? This is not only a human feature. Many types of animals do have that. So object tracking system is about immediately enumerating small sets. Okay? And you don't do that by some kind of counting, individuation, quantification, whatever. You do that simply by being able to track a couple of objects. Okay? Usually 0 to 4 in humans. Okay? In some other species you can have 0 to 3 or maybe 1 to 3 or something like that. Okay? But in general, in humans what we have is 0 to 4. So you don't need to count, you don't need to do anything, you just know immediately that that's it, because you're able to mentally keep track of those structures. Okay? We know that it manifests in infants. Okay? So the assumption is probably maybe it's innate, or at the very, it's like this is something that develops extremely early. Okay? So this is the first cognitive system. The second one is called the approximate number system. Okay, now again, no counting. Which set has more elements? Who says this one? No, this one, right? Okay, you did not count. That's okay, and still you can immediately you approximate the cardinality of sets as long as the difference is at least 10%. This is something that, again, manifests in children, in small children, and it develops with age. So, if you look at the literature, usually adults are able to discriminate both sets. There's two sets where it's like more or less 50% difference, right? Or 10%, something like that. Okay, so this one has 9 elements, this one has 10 elements. Okay, so again, now we have estimation of the numerosity, okay? And we do not rely on symbolic representations. Okay, this is something that we do instantaneously. Right? Okay, so now the question. Which mamaduck is in trouble when she loses one duckling? This one, right? She's only 3 ducklings, so her OTS system is switched, of course, because it is present in ducks. If she loses one duckling, she immediately notices that, and she's in trouble. Okay? This one, on the other hand, has I don't know how many, let's say 12, 13, 14, I don't know. Okay? When this mamaduck loses one duckling, she might not even notice. Okay? She will probably notice when she loses 2 or 3. Right? The reason is because there's this distinction deeply rooted in our evolutionary, in our cognitive evolution, whatever, that you have those 2 different systems, and probably what we understand as the cognitive basis of arithmetic is based on somehow the interplay between the 2. Okay? All right. Are there any questions at this point? Okay. So we know that number sense is present in non-human animals. Okay? We know that primates, apes, okay, chimpanzees, gorillas, or orangutan, they can apprehend, compare, and even do approximate addition on quantities. Right? They can do that. Right? It has been demonstrated that similar abilities are present also in dolphins and other mammals, but you also find them in birds and fish. And there are recent papers suggesting that you also find something in certain plants. Right? The plants do compute in a way. So like the question is whether we still want to use the word compute to what plants do, but some kind of a similar process is going on there. Okay, however, so non-human animals can do like incredible things. This is really amazing what they can do. So this is here we have Ayumu. This is actually right now I can't recall. I think this is like one I think it is in Japan, in Tokyo, I'm not sure, but let's say, okay. So what Ayumu can do is this. Okay, gets his reward, he's distracted. Is it clear what you just did? Yes? No? Okay. So let's try something else. Yeah? Okay. So the task is just for a short, for a couple of milliseconds, what he sees is a set of numbers. Okay? Then doesn't see that, and his task is to order them from the smallest to the biggest. Okay, that's Ayumu's task. Okay, so there are a couple of things Ayumu needs to understand. Ayumu needs to understand that symbols refer to some abstract notions, and that those notions are ordered in a particular way. So it doesn't matter. So it does matter the order of pointing, because the order of pointing corresponds to the magnitude, right? And he can do it really quickly, right? He knows exactly the order. If he's distracted, if there's a long break, he can memorize that, keep that in his working memory. Okay, so that's quite a lot. Okay, that's quite a lot. Okay, so it's like trained chimpanzees are usually better in this kind of task than untrained humans. Okay, so wow, that is sort of remarkable, isn't it? So there is, however, one difference, which, as far as I know, has not been somehow debunked or whatever. So far there's no evidence for symbolic addition in non-human animals, except for the chimpanzee, and only after long training. And even after long training, there are common mistakes and common computational errors and so on. Okay? So even if so the question is whether this is some sort of, it's a matter of degree, or whether this is something special, some particular ability in humans that is there. Okay, so let's try to think what might be this particular ability or predisposition in humans that they can do with counting. Okay? So one interesting thing concerns implicit knowledge of counting in children. Okay, children are never taught certain principles underlying counting. Okay, so they have an intuitive understanding of the cardinality of a set and its conservation under changes that do not affect quantity. Okay, so changes in order, say changes in shape, color, or whatever. Okay? And children know very well, no one teaches children, that in order to count properly, each entity needs to be counted once and once only. Okay? And one number cannot be associated with more than one entity. Okay? There's no explicit formulation. If you try to say something like that to teach your kid or kid you're working with, this kind of things, they would be confused. And you would be probably confused. Why do you need to, say it explicitly? This is obvious, isn't it? But it doesn't have to be obvious, for example, in other species, right? So there is something interesting about that. So what children know is that in order to count, you have a set of fruit, and you want to enumerate it, so you do 1, 2, 3, but you can also do 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, the order of pointing doesn't matter at objects. What does matter is the order of words that you use. So 3, 1, 2, this is not how you count, right? Okay? So there's important distinction between the order of symbols used in a sequence and the order of corresponding, associating the symbols with entities you count. Okay? And children can immediately understand when you do and correct subtle errors. So if you try 1, 2, 3, 4, the child will say, no, you counted the error twice. This is wrong counting, right? Similar, if you said 1, 2, no, you omitted the banana. This is wrong, okay? No one ever teaches children that, okay? But this kind of principle is there. Okay, so there's a hypothesis that tries to explain how children do that, okay? And this postulates certain innate principles, okay, that are prerequisites for counting, okay? And the first one is the stable order of symbols. You need an order list of symbols, so something 1, 2, 3. The order does matter. It's like when you learn the list, it's always ordered in the same way. The idea is that symbols correspond to some numeric values. And what you do in counting is that you establish a one-to-one correspondence between symbols and values and objects. Okay? And the third thing is that the cardinality of the whole set is given by the last symbol in the sequence. Okay? So when you do that, 1, 2, 3, the last symbol was 3, this corresponds to the last object in the set, so the cardinality of the whole thing is 3. And this is there. Okay? The assumption, the idea is that something like this is innate, and that's why children don't need special type of training to get that. Okay? And there's a funny thing concerning the acquisition of counting in children, right? So young children, so actually my younger nephew is still in this phase, and actually my daughter is also in this phase, but she doesn't talk yet, so it's hard to test her. So there's a phase when you have two components. So you have the stable order of symbols, and you have the understanding of the importance of the one-to-one correspondence. It's like putting objects and numbers in a relationship. But you do not have the cardinality principle. Okay? So when you have those kids, so if you happen to have a child like this, or there is a child at this age, somewhere near, it's like this, it's cool. Because they often can count up to, say, maybe even 10. Okay? And you ask them, count the bananas or whatever, and they say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then you ask them, so how many bananas are there? And they would just guess, they would say 3, 5, 6. Or you would say, so give me 10 bananas, and they would say, give me 5 bananas. They would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, and then give you some random number of bananas. Okay? So there is a stage in which not all principles are active. Okay? This is something that is common in development and growth, so that you have this kind of potential, but not realized yet. But if everything goes well, it's like it clicks and you have it. Okay. So at the age of 2.5, they understand that counting is an abstract procedure, and you can apply it to different kinds of objects. Okay, so it's not you can count fruit, but you can count yellow things, or you can count round things, or whatever. At the age of 3.5, they understand that the order of recitation is crucial, but the order of pointing at objects is irrelevant. Okay, so at that age, they correct you if you try to do 3, 1, 2. Maybe it's a number. Right? And finally, at the age of 4, they usually master this kind of counting, and they understand that it can be generalized to novel situations, and they very often reinvent arithmetic when they encounter new problems. Okay, so this is quite remarkable. So there are, of course, slight differences among populations and whatnot, but this is more or less the general picture that emerges from the literature. Right. So now the question is, so how do so we have those innate principles. It's like how exactly what happens that it's like from that the set of 3 innate principles you end up being able to perform computation and so use linguistic quantification and stuff like that. And the most prominent theory is called the Quinean bootstrapping theory, which is its crucial component is a linguistic one. And the idea is that there are 3 steps of acquisition of counting in human children. And the first one is that you learn the ordered list. Okay? And what you need to learn as a child is that the relative order matters. And children are very interested in things like like this kind of ordered list. And eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and so on and so on. I guess everyone has this kind of experience from their childhood, like children do like it, and they understand that this is eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and not eeny, mo, meeny, miny, or whatever, right? This is like the order is crucial. But at the first stage, they understand only that, okay? So the list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is simply eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and there's no understanding of what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever. Okay? So those are not discrete elements that do have meaning. So again, that's the prominent hypothesis. We don't know for sure that that's true, but that's the Quinean bootstrapping theory. Okay, so at the second stage, they learn the meaning of symbols. So they understand that 3, for example, so double brackets in semantics, in linguistics, mean that this is the meaning of 3. So this corresponds to a certain numeric value. And the last stage is that human children understand that the list represents number in such a way that the last symbol in the list corresponds to the cardinality of the whole set, right? So if you had a set like this and you did our eeny, meeny, mo, so 1, 2, 3, so the cardinality of the whole set is 3 because the last symbol corresponds to the last element in the set. Okay, no element is that. Right. Okay. So this concerns the first aspect of counting, right? It's like counting lists and how do we know, and that sort of corresponds to the question of quantification of enumeration of sets. But now let's try to think what is known about what kind of things can be counted in the first place. Okay. Is this, at this stage, is everything clear? Am I too slow or too quick, or is it okay? Everyone's okay? We're on the same page? Great. Okay, so there is this one very well-known thing, which is called in the cognitive literature the object substance distinction. The idea goes back basically to Quinean, right? To his famous 1960 piece says that basically to distinguish between cat and say mud, you need to know what counts as one cat. Okay, it's not only that it's cat stuff as opposed to mud stuff, but you need to know that cat stuff comes in certain units. You have one unit of cat stuff that is one cat, right? And you don't have that in the meaning of mud or gold or whatever, right? So the idea is that and it has been tested experimentally extensively, especially in the 90s. So there are certain it seems innate ontological commitments. So like either they develop extremely early in our development, or they are simply innate. So when an infant is born, they have certain assumptions concerning the nature of objects. Right? So objects are treated as particular types of entities as opposed to it's like chunks of substance. And the first assumption is that objects are bounded. They do have natural boundaries. Okay? You can distinguish between like where an object ends and where an object ends. The second assumption is that objects are cohesive. Okay? Those are things, those are entities that come in one piece. Parts of objects stick together. Okay? Not as in the case of portions of substance. And the third thing is that objects move across space along continuous paths. Okay? They move as one thing. And it has been proved that infants do not expect those kind of properties when it comes to portions of substance. Okay? This has been also demonstrated that something like that is present in non-human animals, in primates, and other types of mammals. And I couldn't find an experiment showing what we were interested in exactly, but this will give you an idea how those kind of experiments are performed, right? And so this is from the 90s, so the quality is not great, but I think it's interesting.
A team of researchers is now using ingenious experiments to discover previously unsuspected abilities of newborns and young children. Professor René Bejean studies how babies develop the concept of object permanence.
By object permanence, we mean really a set of beliefs about objects. The first and most fundamental belief is that objects continue to exist when hidden. The first person to investigate the development of object permanence beliefs in infants was Jean Piaget, the famous Swiss psychologist. And he claimed that it's not until approximately 8 to 9 months of age that infants understand that objects continue to exist when hidden, and that it's not until approximately 12 months of age that babies begin to understand that objects not only exist but retain their physical and spatial properties when hidden. What we've done is to devise a series of tasks where the infant simply had to look at possible and impossible events.
In this experiment, a 6-month-old baby watches a cart rolling down tracks, going behind a screen and coming out the other side. The screen is lifted to show a block sitting behind the tracks. Next, the baby sees the block placed on top of the tracks. The screen comes down, the cart rolls exactly as before. But in the real world of permanent objects, the block should have stopped the cart. The baby stares longer at this apparently impossible event.
When infants are surprised or puzzled by an event, they tend to look at it longer. So our prediction is always that if infants perceive the events as we do, then they will look longer at the impossible or magical event than at the possible event. What we found is that infants as young as 3.5 months of age, and perhaps younger, but certainly as young as 3.5 months of age, understand that objects continue to exist when hidden. One contribution of this research is to say that we must really take a very close look at infants' physical knowledge. It's much richer, much more sophisticated than used to be thought.
Okay, so this is really nice. So it's like a series of similar experiments were performed to show that children understand that objects are different types of entities than substances, to say, right? And so this is something deeply rooted, okay? Even if you're cautious enough not to say that this is innate, so this is something that develops extremely early, and this is something that guides the way we perceive the world. And even more interestingly, there is a series of experiments with broken objects. So if I ask you to count, if I ask you, how many forks are there on the screen? How many? 5, right. Good, yeah? But if you ask a child between 3 and 4 years, they wouldn't say 5. They would say 6. Okay? Children at that age can't stop. They simply, when asked to count, they simply apply the one-to-one correspondence. They establish the one-to-one correspondence between numbers and discrete integrated objects. Okay? So if something comes in 2 pieces, it comes as 2 objects. So they do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? No way to understand, say, what we do as adults, we sort of understand that quantification is, in this case, what we are supposed to do is to count instances of a concept or a kind or of this artifact fork. And what we do most probably is that we sort of retrieve, we understand this is a broken fork, so we retrieve the internal particle structure and count this as 1, although physically it comes in 2 pieces, right? But young children can't do that, okay? So when forced to count, they will count discrete physical integrated objects, okay? And this is also true in the case of other types of tasks, other forms of linguistic quantification. So if you ask a young child, where's more forks? Okay? So they would say, yeah, this is more forks than this. Right? And they would also in production, they would refer to a broken fork as some forks. Okay, so we have 3 things, like numerical quantification in natural language, pluralization, and comparative constructions, quantity comparison. Okay, and in all those cases, children demonstrate that this is extremely important, that what counts as 1 is an integrated whole. Okay, so of course, later other things add up and so on, but this strongly suggests that the basis of all the like counting and stuff like that is related to integrity of things, of objects. Okay. Right. So let me see. So I've been talking for 40 minutes now, something like that. Right. So there's also what we'll see. So there's also an old ontological intuition concerning particle structures. So you know that probably much better than I do, right? But if you look at what pre-Socratics had to say about particle structure, so you find basically roots of what we now call numerology, so the study of part-whole relationship. And there's this strong philosophical intuition that entities are often made up of smaller things, of parts, right? It's just like, and if you look at Plato's Parmenides or I don't know how to pronounce it, Theaetetus. Sorry? Theaetetus, thank you. Yeah. I think there are a couple ways to pronounce it, I never know which one is correct. Okay, so what Plato was interested in is how to distinguish between unity, okay, and arbitrary sum of parts, right? So things are complex, they consist of parts, but certain things, though they are complex, are treated as units, right? And so if you think about this situation and this situation, there is a sense, of course, that here we're talking about parthood, okay? This is a part of this apple. And here we're also talking about parthood. This is part of this set of collections of apples, okay? But the difference between this situation and this situation is that parts are arranged in a different way. Here, parts form a particular type of structure, an internal, let's call it integrated whole, whereas in this case, the arrangement of parts doesn't matter. Okay? You could, move one here or there, whatever. You're just interested in proportion of the whole set. Right. So, moreover, there's this thing there's this cognitive fact about our perception, which is called the particle perception. That we humans can, and this again, it manifests also in young children, already in young children, there's some debate how early and how to test that, what are good methods to test that, whatever. But if you look at figure 16, you can actually you can test it yourself, right? So you can simultaneously switch between one type of perception and another one, okay? Either you can focus and see fruitman, okay? Now you perceive it as a whole, okay? Or you can switch and perceive it as a collection of fruit, right? So either the whole is salient or the parts are salient, okay? And you can do it like on a spot. You can switch between these two kinds of perception, right? So this brings us to the question. Okay, so we've heard quite a lot now about this, like what is known about counting, quantification, individuation, things like that, from the cognitive perspective. The question, okay, of course there are more things to say, but it's like we don't have that much time. So now the question is, does natural language provide any evidence that those things are relevant for the way how we understand certain utterances? Right? Does natural language, does grammar and semantics, do grammar and semantics care about those things? Okay? They might not, right? But so it's an open question. So I'm trying to convince you that actually they do, but sometimes you need to be careful and you need something more to unveil the hidden principles of human language. Right. So let's start with the ATS-ANS distinction. Right. So just to remind you, the object tracking system and approximate number system. Okay. So the Masaryk, who's not in trouble because she has only 3 doctrines, and the Masaryk, who is in trouble because she has 13 or more doctrines. Okay. So it has been shown that in many languages, not in English, but in many languages, there's different syntax, there's different grammar in low and high numerals. Okay? Czech happened to be one of those languages. And high numerals often pattern with quantifiers such as many, right? So in Czech, what you find is different case marking. So you say 2, 3, 4 kočky, 2, 3, 4 cats, but if you say piet or mnoho, you use the genitive case. Okay? Piet, koček. Okay? So it seems there's okay, it might be incidental, it might be just some funny fact about Czech, right? But if you look at Sami, Sami is I'm not sure what variety of Sami is that. It's like Sami languages are Rhodic languages, are Finno-Greek languages spoken in Scandinavia. So like those are languages of the reindeer, what they do, reindeer herders, right? So the native ethnicity of the Scandinavia between the, Nordic people came, right? So most of them are endangered, but are still there. So if you see, I don't know, Sami, so if you use Kieti, Puma, and Poku, okay, so here we have the accusative case, right? Once we switch to higher numerals, there's the positive case. The case system in Sami is different than in Czech, but it doesn't matter. It's like we have different forms. There seems to be grammatical distinction between that sort of corresponds to the OTS-ANS distinction. Right? Furthermore, Czech or Sami or English are a type of language that so-called the non-classifier type of languages. There are also classifier languages, and an example of that would be Mandarin Chinese, or Thai, or Japanese, or Vietnamese. So in those languages, what you can do, you cannot combine a numeral with a noun directly. Okay, so if you try to see something, san shu, 3 book, like meaning 3 books, there's no singular plural distinction in Chinese, you cannot do that. You need an additional element, and that element is called, in linguistics, called a classifier. So in this case, it would be san, pen, shu, where pen is classifier for counting things that have to do something with writing, like newspapers, books, whatever. You can have different classifiers. They somehow classify your lexicon. But you do need that. So that would need something like 3 pieces of book stuff, literally. Right? So there are languages that do that. And even more interesting, if there are languages like Mi'kmaq. This is a language, an Algonquian language spoken in northern America, northern USA, southern Canada. So in Mi'kmaq, there's a difference between low and high numerals, in that low numerals behave more or less like Czech or English. So you say simply 5 men, and that means. But with higher numerals, you need a classifier. So if you wanted to say 6 men, that would be bad. You would need to say 6 pieces of men. Something like that, literally. Okay? Cool. Right, so it seems it's very hard to test to what extent this could be pushed very far, right? But it seems that grammar does care, if you look closely across languages, the grammar does care about, at least you find a reflex of the distinction, of the cognitive distinction in grammars. Okay, so another thing concerns count lists, right? So the Quinean bootstrapping theory was formulated in English, and English is not a very interesting language in this respect, because what you find in English is that there are, so you always have 1, 2, 3, right? So the form of the numeral is always the same. So if you count, you do 1, 2, 3, and when you enumerate sets, you say 1 cat, 2 cats, 3 cats. Okay, the form of the numeral is different, but it's not always the case. In many languages, you have 2 sets of numerals. One set, sometimes, very often, it's not that both sets are totally different. Certain elements in those sets are different. Say in Russian, to some extent also in Czech, right? So when you count, as a count list, you have raz, dva, tri, okay? But when you enumerate sets, you say один дом, два дома, три дома, and so on. Okay? So here you have a different form of a numeral than here. And this is unexpected. Why? This is unexpected on the bootstrapping theory because it is assumed that the count list, okay, set of numerals, should be the basis for developing numeric quantification, linguistic quantification. Okay? And now you have different sets of numerals. Right? But this is not only the case in Russian. Actually, you have 2 sets of numerals. This is sometimes called counting numerals. So those that appear in a count list, in a counting sequence, and attributive numerals, those that you use when you modify nouns, when you enumerate sets. Okay, this is just a glimpse. Okay, so now, so I'm involved in a project. It's an ongoing project to try to test whether the Quinean bootstrapping theory, is correct, whether it formulates correct predictions. But because it seems that there are a couple of predictions, so it seems if the bootstrapping theory is correct, there should be a phase in the development development of child acquisition when children only use counting numerals. Okay, so those guys. So it should be possible, in principle, to capture a phase in which, say, Russian children would say раз дом, два дома, три дома, meaning один дом, one house. Okay, but using the counting, the numeral that appears in the count list. Is that clear? Yeah? Okay? So, we haven't run the experiments yet, so now we're looking for fundings. But if you are lucky, then we can record that fact, and that would prove the bootstrapping Quinean theory to be correct. Okay? If we are not lucky, we're not able, because the anecdotal evidence is that Russian children don't do that. Okay? But that's anecdotal. You need proper experimental setting to test that. So if we don't, that doesn't say much, okay? Because it's just a coincidence. So what you need to do is basically to see how quickly children acquire numerals. Okay? And the prediction is that if you happen to be a speaker of a language which has 2 sets of numerals, okay, you should be slower in acquisition. Why? Because you need to know that one type of numerals is used in a counting list, whereas the other one is used when you count objects, when you enumerate sets. Okay? We don't have the results yet. It's an ongoing project, so it's like in a couple of years I might tell you, whether it's correct or not, but that's what we know now. Okay. There's also another phenomenon in grammar known as the must count distinction. Right? So it is very well known that there are uncountable or must counts, and countable or count nouns. Okay? It's a grammatical category. It has nothing to do with recognition. It's just the way how nouns behave in sentences. And the set of tests you can use, so count nouns, pluralize, so you have cat, cats, and are compatible with cardinal numerals, so you can say 2 cats. Whereas mass nouns do not pluralize, mud, muds. If they do pluralize, you have different meaning. It doesn't mean 2 portions, it doesn't mean 2, either it means 2 standardized portions, so like as when you say 2 beers, means like 2 standard portions of beer, or it can mean also 2 subkinds, okay? But it doesn't mean 2 arbitrary portions of malt, okay? If you ask for 2 beers and you get that much and that much beer, you would say something went totally wrong, right? So there is this distinction, and the intuition is that it somehow corresponds to the object-substance distinction, cognitive object-substance distinction we talked about. Well, and yes, like it seems to be the case, and for many years people looked at those 2 classes, but it turns out it's not that simple. Okay, there's another class of nouns which are mass nouns. They are uncountable. You cannot pluralize them. You cannot combine them with cardinal numerals. But they are object mass nouns in the sense that they denote discrete objects. So if you look at nouns such as furniture, silverware, or footwear, check navitek, bijouterie, all things like that, okay? You can also do furnitures. But, so it seems there's this clash between grammar and conception. But, interestingly, if you do quantity comparison tasks, so if you present people a picture like this, you have one big silver, it's not spoon, it's fork, and 3 small silver forks. One big shoe, 3 small shoes, just some lump of toothpaste, and 3 small chunks of toothpaste. And you ask us like, who has more, right? So here, this one would be true, right, in this situation. Right? Why? Because you compare based on volume. Right? However, if you ask who has more here, volume doesn't matter. You compare based on cardinality. So this guy would have more. Here, volume again doesn't matter. Okay? So this one guy would have more silverware, although this guy would have more silver. Right? So it seems there's a funny thing because they fall in between. Right? They are mass nouns when it comes to the behavior and grammar, but they are count nouns when it comes to how you interpret them. Right? And this is attested in multiple languages. Okay, so the final part of this part, so I should have like 12 minutes, and I should
yeah, sure.
something like that. Okay. So if we think about how we individuate parts, and there are some philosophical literature on that, it seems that people do distinguish between what you could call arbitrary portions or arbitrary parts and structure parts, functional parts. And the latter are, what's important is that the notions of spatial integrity is very important. So what is crucial is that not all parts need to be integrated, not need to be contiguous, right? But if you want to count them, they need to, right? So English is nice because it distinguishes between 2 uses of part, a mass use. So a splinter is part of the table, okay? When part is used as a mass noun, it's just an arbitrary portion of the table. That's it. But a leg is a part of the table. Okay, it comes in one piece, it has some function, it is structured in a way. right? And now let's have a look at the check example. Right, so there are, is this clear? This is like those two notions? Okay. So if we say dvě částky kočky leží na silnici, two parts of the cat lay on the road, okay? This is a macabre situation, right? But if we say část koček leží na silnici, it's like literally part of the, or some of the cats lay on the road. This is not anymore a macabre situation. What we say here, we basically say it's like that a subset of cats is laying on a street, and that's it. Okay, they're not grounded birds, a couple of them. Okay, but once again, so again, we have a similar situation as here. We have the plural here, but now we have a numeral. So dvě částky koček leží na silnici. Two parts of the cats are laying on the street. Okay, and now we go back to the macabre situation. Okay, it cannot mean two subsets of the total number of cats are laying on the street. What it means is that there are body parts of cats laying on the street. Right? Are those into? Yeah, this is maybe a little bit too linguistic. Yeah, well, what it does show is that basically you can have two different notions of parthood, material parthood and individual parthoods. Like you have when you take a proportion, when you take a portion of volume in terms of volume, or you take a subset. But when you count, you do not count subsets. You count integrated things. Right. And this, interestingly, is reflected in grammars of natural languages. Okay. So natural languages are sensitive to distinction. So think of those two flags. Let's call it. We have a Maltese-like flag. So let's call it a flag AB, and a Canadian-like flag. Let's call it ABA. Right. Now, when you do some sorting, which I did, turns out that languages have different constructions, so different types of proportional quantifiers, but that at first glance look very similar, look synonymous. But if you look closer, they're not. Okay? So in English, we say half the flag is red. This could be true in the AB situation and also in the ABA situation. Right? Doesn't matter. But if you say half of the flag is red, the ABA situation, this is weird. This is not true in this situation. So what this construction cares about is that give me a part that is integrated, that comes in one piece. Okay? The way it can be encoded in grammar differs. So in Polish, you have a special suffix. Like notice that Czech is different in this respect. Okay? But in Polish or in Russian, you have a special suffix ka, which says hey, I want an integrated part. I'm not happy with something that is discontinuous. So in 23b, would be not okay with the ABA situation. Okay? Then you have German. In German, this is achieved by yet another marking. So in this situation, we have a suffix, a part of a word, an object that attaches to a word. In this situation, we have a free morpheme, more or less. So die eine Hälfte von der Fahne ist rot. If you add this guy, the ABA situation is not possible anymore. In Portuguese and in Dutch, for example, you have different words that, and again, in 25b, the word meia says, I want to have that this, I'm about half the word continuous. Okay? And in Mandarin Chinese, you have different classifier structures. Okay, we've already talked a little bit about classifiers. I'm not going to torment you with Mandarin Chinese. What is important that this kind of distinction is present in grammar. Okay? Right. And I think this is the last thing. Yeah. And the last thing is that we should distinguish between counting and measuring. Okay? At first blush, it might seem that counting and measuring are more or less similar things, right? And to some extent they are. However, it has been demonstrated that in different languages there's different syntax, different grammar. But more interestingly, also counting indicates integrity, whereas measuring does not. Okay? So imagine you have two blobs of liquid on the table, right? So this this is 1 milliliter. This is another milliliter, and so this blob is 1.5 milliliter. Has 1.5 milliliters of liquid, and this blob has 1.5 milliliters of liquid. Okay, so this is perfectly normal to say there are 3 milliliters of liquid on the table. It's just normal when you measure how much volume there is. But this is very strange to say there are 3 objects on the table. Okay, although you could, you could force yourself to thinking about this split milliliter as an object, but this is not how we understand natural language. Okay, expressions. All right. And also, sometimes you can shift numeral phrases to get the measuring really. So if you have a context like this, so imagine John is sitting with his child. They put 3 whole apples on a table, and John says there are 3 apples on the table. Let's count them together. 1, 2, 3. This is perfectly normal. But let's alter the situation just a little bit. Let's imagine that John and his kid sliced 3 apples. Okay, they sliced them. They put the slices into a bowl and they stirred. You can say there are 3 apples in the bowl. Okay, what it means is that there is some apple stuff corresponding to the volume of 3 apples. But what you cannot do, you cannot continue. Let's count them together. 1, 2, 3. Why? Because the integrity constraint is violated. Right. Okay. So in the remaining time, I will give you a very quick idea how to make sense out of it. And the idea is to work a little bit more on what I call general counting principles. Okay, something we've already talked about. But there's one. So it's like taking different things, putting them together, enhancing a little bit, and trying to see what it is. Okay. So if you want to count, if you want to put an object in one-to-one correspondence with a number, you need to satisfy 3 conditions. It's like that object needs to satisfy 3 conditions. So first is the condition on non-overlap. So when you count, you're only allowed to count entities that are disjoint. You can easily tell when one ends and the second one begins. The second condition is called the maximality condition. So when you count, you assign a number to the whole thing. You cannot leave out a part of that thing for later, counting later. Okay? And the third condition is the condition of integrity. Okay, this seems obvious because this list of conditions gives you 1, 2, 3. But if we didn't have that, we could imagine another quantification operation. Let's call it illegal counting. Okay, which would be okay, but that's not. So we would do 1, 2, 3 when we violate the principle of integrity and non-overlap and probably maximality as well, right? So we could imagine such an operation, but that's not what we do when we count. Okay, this is also applicable at the level of parts. So imagine you have a teddy bear. Imagine it's called let's call fuzzy wuzzy. Okay, and for whatever reason you wanted to count fuzzy wuzzy's part. Okay, so what you do once you identify parts that are salient, so you do 1, 2, 3. What you cannot do something like that. There is definitely sense in which fuzzy wuzzy's ear and leg are part of the teddy bear, but they're not a part of the teddy bear, and you're only allowed to count things that come in one piece. And this is strange because there's overlap. Okay? So, so now I'm really not sure whether I want to do it or whether you want to do it. So I can imagine 2 ways, because there are like maybe 6 more slides. Either I stop here and we don't talk about very vague model I have in mind to account for that, or I go on and very quickly, present you how that could be, how all those things could be accounted for, and maybe a little bit. So it's up to you basically what you want, because I think it's.
Well, we're right toward the end, but it'd be a shame if you've got the model that explains all the data.
Okay. So I just Yeah, but if no one opposes, no one says, well, go away, then I go on. Okay. So what you can do, so as Mike asked me not to be technical, so I'll try not to be. Okay, so this is something that is, mereology is the study of parts. It's something that has been used in philosophy, in formal ontology, used a lot. So what you have here is a mereology or semilattice. It's like a structure that when you can model the relation, the partout relation. Okay, so this guy here says it's the sum formation, and what this diagram represents is that an object A is part of the object A and B, which in turn is formed by summing up the object A and B. Okay, so you have a level of units, and then you can derive sums or collections of those units. So you can think of those things are minimal or simple parts, and those are bigger entities that you create by adding parts. Okay? So this is something that semanticists do a lot, not only semanticists. But this is insufficient. Why? This is insufficient because it only says if you're an entity, you are reducible to the sum of your parts. Okay? So this contrasts with our intuitions about objects. Okay? So if you're a glass, you're basically a collection of shards. And it doesn't matter, of course it's like in a model, right? It doesn't matter how those shards are arranged. So there should be no ontological difference between this and if I broke it, and there would be just a collection of shards, as long as you have the total number of shards is the same. Those are equivalent objects. And our intuition, and also there's cognitive evidence I try to present that we perceive things, objects in a different way. So what we need an additional element, a topological element. So topology is interested in spatial properties of topological properties of space, those that are unaffected by continuous deformations of shape and size, right? So topology basically says says something about how places are related to each other, how they are arranged. Okay? And now you can take topology and mereology and make something that is called mereotopology. I didn't come up with those names, but mereology is from meros, it's like part, and topology, topos, place. So now you have it's like this mereology on steroids, something much stronger with more power, because it says not only that things are part of bigger things, okay, but it also says that certain parts have a special status in the model because they are connected. So the vertical line tracks the partout relation. Well, it's like that A is part of A and B. And the horizontal line tracks the connectedness relation, that certain parts are connected, overlap. Okay? And now with those two things, you can distinguish between, okay, let's skip this, let's go right here. With those two things, you can distinguish the difference between this entity, the entity made out of this being equivalent to the sum of A and B, right? And this entity, an entity being equivalent to the sum C and D. Okay? What's different about this AB is that we perceive it as an object, right? It is bounded. It comes in one piece. It is integrated, right? Whereas this entity is just an arbitrary sum. Okay? You can even think of another entity, the entity A and C. Okay? There is some way to divide nature in such a way. There is a way in which you could divide nature so that integrity doesn't occur. It's not important. Okay? But we as humans don't do that. It's like we could try to come up with something like that. Right? Is that clear? Right? Okay. So once you have that, right? Of course, this could be once you have that, you can incorporate the integrity requirement in quantificational, certain quantificational operations. Okay, so numerals would say, hey, we're good with things that have the integrity component in their meaning. And we're not good with things that do not have that. Okay? If you had measure phrases like 1 millimeter, they wouldn't care. 1 millimeter would say, give me liquid or whatever, and I don't care whether it comes in one piece. I don't care whether it is separated. It is whatever. I just measure volume and that's it. Right? And the way you do that, of course, there are a couple of definitions that I skipped, just not to torment you too much. But the way, imagine a partitive constructions like, say, in German, zwei Teile des Apfels, 2 parts of the apple. So now, what you can capture both the structure of this phrase and its meaning by postulating a hierarchical structure, some abstract representation that says certain things are less important than other things. Okay, and the word, let's say, the word apple is the least important thing in the way that it is dominated by other elements of that structure. And the most important part of that structure is this guy here, which says 2 or 2, which imposes certain conditions on what's here in order to be well formed and interpretable. Okay, so this guy here, whatever is down there, okay, it commands that guy. It says, hey, I want things. I'm only interested in entities in sets that consist of entities that are integrated, non-overlapping, and maximal. Okay, and of course, this gives you only the structure. And you can also compute the meaning by running quite a complex computation, which we're not going to unless you want to talk about in detail. But in principle, if you do that, you have a simple invisible principle that can explain, or at least tries to explain, all that complex visible things we've been talking about for a couple of minutes now. Okay. So what we've learned about cognitive aspects of counting. Okay, so that numeric concepts probably arise as some kind of interplay between 2 independent cognitive systems. Both are evolutionarily old. But what is also important is that you don't only need a numeric concept, you also need something that is called a one-to-one correspondence, some kind of understanding or mental ability to relate those numeric concepts with objects. And this is, as I was trying to show, not that obvious when you think about it, how it's done. Okay? And not to say how it developed. What we've learned from the linguistic part of this talk is that natural language is sensitive to those cognitive notions we talked about, and they are reflexed in grammar. So you find particular constructions that say, hey, we do care about how parts of a particular entity are arranged, all the integrity stuff and so on. And what we've also seen that quantification of the parts and wholes is subject to identical restriction. It doesn't matter what you count, the set of restrictions is the same. Okay? And what you need to satisfy is the principle of non-overlap, maximality, and integrity. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, we've got a few minutes for questions, so I'll sit up here and keep track of who's on deck. Yeah.
You mentioned computing in plants. Could you tell me more about that?
Yeah.
It caught my attention.
Yeah, sure. So there are a couple of papers. I think there are 2 papers right now about. Oh, I forgot both. I forgot the botanical name. It's like those carnivorous plants, right? So they are sensitive to the number of touches. Okay. So once you, so the gate is I don't think how to call it. This is like this part that closes, like in a carnivore's plant, is open. But if it reacted to each time it was touched, it's like lose an enormous amount of energy, right? So they usually count a number of touches, right? So after, say, if it's touched 4 times, then it closes. Before that, certain species do that, okay? So, of course, the question is whether this is, I wouldn't claim, and I guess no one would claim that, it's like the underlying mechanism is the same as in mammals and humans, but it seems that we have a case of convergent evolution where, it's like probably very different mechanisms give rise to some kind of similar effect as number sense in plants. Okay. There are also other papers, but right now I want to call this.
Casey?
Thanks, that was really interesting. So I had a question about the predictions that the Quinean bootstrapping view had. So I'm not sure about this, but I was just wondering why it's the case that that view predicts that when you have what is it? So if you have 2 sets of numerals, the view predicts that you'll be slower to master the different activities of counting and enumerating sets. I was just wondering why that's so. I mean, I suppose the natural part is, you have more stuff to learn. It's going to take you longer. But I was thinking, well, you might think that if you have these discrete terms for these different kind of activities, it makes it more efficient for you to learn them. Because there's not going to be ambiguity when people ask you certain questions about which task you're supposed to perform.
Yes, that's a perfect question. So I've written a paper with Pavel Saha, colleague from Masaryk University on actually basically that. So like, probably the reason why you have those 2 different numerals is that they are, in a way, they are efficient because it's just like you do not have those ambiguities and other things. I'm not going to talk about that. I'll try to convince you why that is a problem. So the problem is this: a child when encounters a situation of counting, as in a sequence and counting, please, learns those numerals, right? Okay. So now, this is the first step, as we know from child language acquisition and studies and so on. This is always the first step. Now, the only access, right, to this set is by hearing what the people say. Right? No one says "раз дом" in Russian. No adult, unless it is some kind of it's like they misspoke or whatever, right? So there is this cognitive cost to mark. Aha! So I am in this situation. Okay, I use this guy. I am in this situation. I cannot use this guy. I need to use this guy. So you need an additional mental operation that would tell you, okay, those guys are unambiguous, but you need to map this meaning onto these use. Right? So you need to do one more thing compared to an English child, which doesn't need to map different one form onto another. Okay? Because the form is the same.
But it would seem like you could say they have to do one less thing than an English child if they're interpreting other people, for example. Because they don't have to disambiguate between the term being used for 2 different activities. Right, so if you're in English, you hear 1, 2, 3, and then you enumerate a set, you say, what, right? So you use the same term, so you might think just that, well, there's this other thing the English child has to do.
Yeah. So I think
maybe not introducing it, maybe, but it's interpreting.
Yeah. So the problem is, I think the problem is twofold. First, the problem is that there, as I've shown you, like those things do not come at once, right? So it's like children go step by step. Okay, maybe it's like there's some, it's like discussion how exactly and when exactly and so on. So once this is learned, okay, you need to get rid of this meaning maybe not get rid of this form and the correspondence between this form and this meaning, and to map this onto that, right? So the idea, and this is how people in acquisition try to understand, it's like explaining this kind of things. This is of course very indirect evidence, but the idea is that once we need to do something like that, and we know from other things that this is the case of submission, right? When you have a similar meaning and two different forms, so something like go went, right? This is another case. We know that children are very late on those guys. They would say go, right? Because what they do, they need to map another, it's like a person, they need to understand that when is something like gold, right? And they are late there because this is cognitively expensive and so on. So this is, maybe if that helps you, this is a similar case as go went, right? Okay?
Thank you very much. Can you shed a little light on numeric topology?
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. And how it collapses atomicity or something.
Yeah. Oh, okay, sorry. This is for this is a copy paste. This is a copy paste thing. So we haven't talked about domicity, but what semanticists usually do when they explain how you when they explain countability, right? So the difference between two cats is okay, two mods is funny, it's weird, right? So they explain that in terms of atoms. And so they postulate that certain words, certain nouns, have a different meaning in the sense that this is very Quinean. So they say, okay, so you have this stuff, this property, but you also there needs to be some kind of information how it is divided into units, and those units are called atoms in formal semantics. Just like, okay, an atom is something that is indivisible, right? So if you have, for example, a portion of mud, right, you can divide it into many portions of mud until you reach certain threshold, and each portion of mud will be still mud, right? But if you have a cat, and if you divide it into two, right, or you cut the cat's leg off, right? So it wouldn't be, that leg wouldn't be a cat, it would be a cat's leg, right? So this it's not divisive. So that's the distinction. So atoms are not divisive in that sense. But atoms create lots of problems, and I don't want atoms in my model, and some other people don't want atoms. And what myriotopology allows you for is to say you don't need to postulate this spiritual property. You can achieve something similar but in a different way. Is my answer satisfactory? But we didn't talk about that, so yeah, sorry, this is copy pasting. Yeah.
Jason, I have another question. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the claim you made earlier that really early on that you don't have to teach children rules of counting.
The
rules like that you count each thing once and only once.
Yeah.
So what is that like? What does that mean? You don't need to teach that because I take it there's lots of things that they pick up. Yeah. Because parents and caregivers model behavior for them about the use of things. So I was wondering what that claims.
So right. So the thing is that first of all, no one does it, right? So unless you have an experimental setting, and once you do it in an experimental setting, I mean, there actually is like very often when you do linguistics also, you try to explicitly explain things that we know unconsciously, right? That's why we can use language, and that's why we use it the way we use it. But we don't have this kind of knowledge. Is not we do not have access to this knowledge, right? It's like this takes a lot of this. This is why so you have lots of discoveries in linguistics, right? So one thing is that first of all the poverty of stimulus evidence. So no one does it, and children do pick it. You can imagine very easily, you can make a thought experiment when you have a type of creature that doesn't have this kind of understanding, right? And until explicitly say that this is disallowed, this kind of creature would not get it. Another thing comes from experiments when there's this, some kind of perplexion, they're perplexed or whatever, and what was the third thing? The third thing is that, so what is this? And of course, so the assumption here is that there are certain, it's like probably innate properties, but of course you need a proper environment so that they manifest themselves, right? It's like once a child grows in a culture that does not use arithmetic or does not use counting, still a couple of cultures like that, this would not be developed, right? But it doesn't mean it's just, it's just the environment that didn't provide this kind of stimuli to develop that. But once there is a kind of environment in which you can, it's like you get the sort of stimuli to feed your internal computational mechanism or whatever, then it develops, right? And this is very different from, say, writing, right? In writing, when you teach children writing, everything needs to be explicitly explained. It's a long process with many mistakes. Even many adults are problems with writing, right? Because writing is an invention. It's our like civilizational invention. Whereas counting is probably something that we are predisposed to do that. I don't know. Did I answer?
Okay, well, let's thank our speaker then.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again.